Hello, my name is Garson Kanin, and I am about to embark on an extraordinary adventure. We are sitting here in the studio on March 20th, 1975, and next month, April, will mark exactly a 40-year anniversary of my professional association with Boris Aronson. In 1935, I was an assistant to George Abbott, and Mr. Abbott co-authored and directed a play called Three Men on a Horse, an enormous Broadway success, which he wrote with John Cecil Home. The designer of that production was a lively, young, popular theater designer named Boris Aronson. And here he is, no longer young, but still, I hope, lively. Boris, what recollections do you have about Three Men on a Horse that you did for George Abbott?
My recollection mainly was that I was working for the group theater, and that was mostly Awakening by our dads, and that was the Bronx, so it wasn't too far from something that I had some familiarity with. Mm-hmm. But then I was given a script, Three Men on a Horse, and I asked Abbott, where does it take place? He says, in Ozone Heights. Now, Ozone Heights to me then was like deep Africa. I had no knowledge whatsoever how it looks like, and it was so foreign to me because it was the first American play about gamblers. Again, something people I wasn't associated with, and I didn't know how to approach things. So I decided to follow people who buy things in 5 and 10. I had a great interest since in the beginning of my career in 5 and 10 and Sears and Roebuck. Those are two influences which were very American.
Why would you say that was? Why the 5?
Because it was so American to me. It was something so different from the European thing, which would always had to do with something which is more antique, and this was a very contemporary thing. For instance, I was very much impressed with for instance, the gloves in Sears and Roebuck. They had a kind of a collage effect of different colors and different things at the same time. That was very ugly, but very practical, and it had a certain American look to me. Mm. And I was looking, what is genuinely American? So I went to 5 and 10 after I read the script, and I followed people who I thought would be similar to those characters. What they bought, I bought. And I came home with so much junk of little things which are completely impractical, made of glass, different welcome sign, all sorts of things. So I made a still life of all those pieces, and I reversed the whole procedure. I said, I'll start from what would be inside of the house, and then to see how the house would look like. And also I decided that the ugliness of the place is very important. The tendency, of course, was to do beautiful sets. And I thought there's nothing beautiful about those gamblers on horses. And I thought, what would be the color of a house like this? I thought the ugliest color that I could think of is a cockroach.
Cockroach?
Yeah, brown cockroach, something terribly ugly about it. And then there's a green powder to kill the cockroach. That would be the color scheme of the set. And I designed the whole show on the basis of this information.
But Boris, I think what is going to interest the people who hear you talk about stage design is the notion that when you began to design a show, you didn't design it architecturally, that you designed it from the inside of the people who inhabit such a place. Now, I have worked, as you know, we've worked together many, many times, but I have worked with other designers as well, and most designers in the theater immediately concern themselves with a floor plan, with the interior decoration, with the design, with the convenience of entrances and exits. Now, of course, you deal with that eventually, I suppose, but you begin at another point.
No, it couldn't be more correct than what you pointed out, because basically I am more concerned with the nature of the script. For instance, it is impossible to apply the same way of thinking, a floor plan or anything which has to do with designing, like when you design Fiddler on the Roof and Company. One, to me, is like primitive folk art, Fiddler on the Roof. New York is a gold mine which has no precedent, which was never painted, which was never, and you have to find your own approach. I could have never designed company in the beginning of when I came to New York. It took me 50 years to know that New York is not 42nd Street, is not neon lights and Coca-Cola signs.
Now, Boris, here comes a query. I think that most people who saw Fiddler on the Roof,
Yeah.
which you designed beautifully, brilliantly, and who also saw Company, can scarcely believe that these two productions were designed by the same hand, by the same intelligence. How do you explain that difference in style coming out of the same man?
The only way some designers are consistent in their handwriting, let's say like Robert Edmund Jones, would be a perfect example where there is a real consistency what he did. The reason for it, he is a New Englander. He was connected with the most famous playwright,
O'Neill.
O'Neill. There is the type of plays he did have something in common. He refused many things which were offered to him because he felt that they're too foreign to
Did you admire him as a stage designer?
Very much.
You did.
He is the exception of any theory one has. For instance, I happen to, I have no interest in symmetrical scenery. But when I look at his, I say, stop there. It's very symmetrical, but that's excellent.
Yes.
So, I mean, there are always exceptions. When you deal with a very gifted person, it breaks all the rules.
Boris, I want to not go too far into our colloquy without some history. When you did Three Men on a Horse, how long had you been a resident of the United States? That was 1935.
I came here in 1923, and I was connected with the Yiddish theater. My first shows were in the Bronx on 180th Street. And the nature of the shows I designed, but that was the off-Broadway of the Yiddish theater. That was the most experimental work they did. And most of the plays took place either in hell or in heaven.
In hell or in heaven?
Yeah, it had nothing to do. It had nothing to do with reality. So the first three.
May I be so bold as to ask how much you earned as a designer then in the uptown Yiddish theater?
I reproduce in my book, which I'm doing now about my work in the theater. I did Bronx Express and the same theater for Rudolf Schildkraut. That's a play by Osip Dimov. For the sets and the costumes, for designing and execution, $350.
You were paid $350,
Yeah,
and that was it?
That was it. I have a document in Yiddish of my contract with them.
How long did it take you to do?
It took me many months to do. The advantage was that there was a chance really to do experimental work, but it was more Russian in nature. You see, I was still much more in the avant-garde of Moscow theater by the influence of Habima and the comedy theater and so on, than actually, because I did a play by Ansky, the one who wrote Dybbuk. He had a play day and night. And the whole thing was more Russian, I would say, than it was American.
Now, from those days to this, Boris, have you ever taken the trouble to count the number of theatrical productions you have designed? Oh, just roughly.
I think it is about, if I count all of them, I mean the Yiddish plays and all the thing, it would be about 140 or something like that.
You have designed about 140 separate theatrical productions.
Yes.
Now, while Boris is getting his breath, let me make a few personal comments on this man and his work. We've been talking here about the theater design of Boris Aronson, almost as though that constituted his oeuvre, but the fact is that it does not. I think Boris will tell us in a few minutes that his relationship to the theater is rather like a relationship to a mistress, because Boris Aronson is, as all of us who know him understand, basically a painter. He is a true painter, a sculptor, who works in the theater because he's stage struck, I suppose. And having worked in the theater and done 140 productions, I don't think that I'm expressing a particularly personal opinion, but I think it is generally considered and conceded in and around the theater that Boris Aronson is certainly the finest stage designer now living. That's not said because I like him. It is said on the basis of the record, on the basis of his accomplishments, on the basis of the number of plays he has done and how successfully he has done them. And I think he is probably the designer in the American theater that one thinks of first. However, he's hard to get. Why are you so hard to get, Boris? Why are you hard to get to do a play? Why do you turn down most plays that are offered to you? You could do 5 or 6 productions a season. Why don't you?
First of all, I have no system. In order to do 5 or 6 productions, or even 3 simultaneously, you have to have a method. You have to know how to design. You have to have a system. I'll stop designing while I come to a point that I'll know exactly how to do a show. I'm lost when I get a script, and I don't look at it, oh, here I can take a piece from this show, from the other show, from something I saw here in Europe, combine it, and something will happen. I start like I never did anything. The greatest fun I have, and the reason I stuck to the theater, is it is undescribable, the joy I get when I have some notion about a show. And I can't guarantee that it will work, because I didn't see it on another stage, I never did it myself, and it could be the worst thing you ever seen. It also could be excellent. And being that I depend on how it's executed, and how it's lit, and who is in it, and how it's utilized, for instance, like in Follies. In Follies, when you walked into Pete Feller's studio shop where they were building this stuff, you will see a lot of dirty woods, black pipes. As a matter of fact, all the designers congratulate me because they thought this is going to be a piece of something which was going to be really horrible, because there was nothing to look at. And the greatest compliment I ever had in the theater was the carpenter who built the show. When he saw it in Winter Garden, he says, look, I built it. I never knew it's going to do that. That moment when they put the thing together and the stages were working on the set, the thrill I got out of it is unexplainable.
Yeah. Now, Boris, as you know, the godmother of this particular project in which we're taking part is Betty Corwin, and she asked me especially if we wouldn't spend a little of our time discussing one particular production, say, that you and I were involved in, from beginning to end. And I suppose the most significant one would be The Diary of Anne Frank.
Right.
Well, my story on The Diary of Anne Frank is that I had read the original book, and then I had been sent by Kermit Bloomgarden, the producer, a copy of a dramatization of the diary written by Francis Goodrich and Albert Hackett. I was told by Kermit Bloomgarden that there already existed a stage design for the production. He offered me the job of directing the play, and of course I was very, very much interested, very emotionally involved immediately, and I said that under certain circumstances and conditions I would undertake the work. Well, one of them, of course, is that I did not want to be handed a physical production, since I think you and I would agree that one of the principal things that a director must do is to convey to the designer or work out with the designer some concept of how this whole play is going to be produced. When The Diary of Anne Frank was first sent to me, as you probably know, it was a multiple scene, multiple set play. It required some 14 or 15 separate settings. And the problem was, how could you go from one set to the other swiftly enough to keep the flow of the story going? I told Kermit Bloomgarden that I did not want to even look at the other production because I wanted to start from scratch. He agreed. I told him there was only one man in the world to do it if he could be interested, and that was Boris Aronson. He sent you the play, and I remember I was living in Europe at the time, and I wrote you and said that I was very, very anxious somehow not to have it be a multiple scene play, but did you see any possible way of turning it into a single unit set that would live the whole time, not with some areas going dead and some live, but leave the whole thing living the whole time? Could you possibly conceive of such a production? And now I think I'll let you take up the story.
It's very helpful because of the question you asked me about the lack of similarity between Fiddler and Company. If you get a play written by a girl who is not an artist, or not a playwright, not a member of the union, it is the quality of the whole thing is documentary. It would be completely false. The only thing to do, if you don't feel like designing a documentary thing, you think it's too naturalistic or it's too what the word documentary means, then don't touch it. Because the essence of the whole thing, the whole power of this statement, of this play, consists of the fact that it's by miracle there's a document written by a person who is not an artist, not a playwright, but happen to have. It's the same thing if you were lucky enough to take a picture of a plane which is on fire and you happen to have a camera at that time. It is one of the luckiest breaks that ever happened that she wrote the thing because the whole thing is a documentary. Then I was thinking, what is the most moving thing to me? It so happened that I participate, unfortunately, in many pogroms in Kiev, and I'm familiar with danger and with this. And I was thinking, what is the worst thing to be cooked up in a place like this, and the Nazis could come in any minute? What is? It's not food. It's not clothes. It's not the worst thing imaginable is lack of privacy. 24 hours. This is so horrible. This is so impossible to take when she walks around Strasbourg and from place to place and can't never for 1 second in any human function be alone. That to me is that's what I have to find. Now there is a great discrepancy. In reality, the whole place is not is smaller than this room.
Yes, that's true.
In reality, in Holland, on the stage with 35 people, it would be ridiculous. That you couldn't function. You couldn't dramatize the thing because you have the opposite. You have to have so much space, and still you have to create the feeling that that you are caught.
Claustrophobic.
Claustrophobia is such an important thing. Now, this is the way I start. I don't start from a plan. I don't start to be consistent that it should look like a way you can sing. I start from what is the nature of this material. What is it trying to say? What does it stand for? For instance, I felt that it was brilliant to get those people to dramatize it and not to get an author who would make it more schmaltzy, because it doesn't need that. It has enough. What it needs is just make it dramatic.
And also a humorous. Which
humorous.
Which was the extraordinary thing.
Exactly. More tragic, more human. That's why it became such a big thing. So I am, in that respect, I mean, I'm not a director, and I couldn't work with actors. But I'm so much more concerned with that aspect of a show than with the blueprints at this moment.
Well, Boris, I think, you know, those of us who know you in the theater, those of us who've worked with you, we don't really think of you as a designer. We always think of you, I know that Hal Prince and I and George Abbott and Harold Clurman and Shumlin, all the directors with whom you've worked, never consider you a designer. We always consider you a collaborator, and an important collaborator, because I know, working with you on shows, we sometimes have sat and talked for 2 hours and never mentioned the show. You tell me about your philosophy of life. You tell me why you like certain foods and why you don't like other certain foods. We met on a boat going to Europe once, and you talked to me for about 3 hours on the spatial theater. I confess to you now that I didn't even know what you were talking about for a while. I later learned. You were the one who pointed out to me that the city of New York is now beginning to be one enormous cubist painting. And you said that that was not an accident, the fact that cubism was coming into our architecture. Now, all this has nothing to do with stage design, but we look upon you and we value you in the theater as a very great and important theater mind, a theater mind. Now, one season you were terribly irritated because you said that the whole theater had turned into a matter of the conflict between relatives. Do you remember that objection?
Yes.
Now, what was wrong with that?
It was wrong that in the time of movies, and the time of television, and the time where there is so successfully solved the problem of really taking pictures of real places and real things, developed to such a point that to imitate that thing in circumstances which don't lend itself, because in the movies you can have 300 sets,
Right.
and you'll never be conscious that you have so many. You see, for instance, like Little Night Music, the movie has so many sets, and they work so very well, and they gave you the whole feeling of this kind of an environment, that to copy, first of all, it's physically impossible to do it. One of the horrible things is the imitation, which occurred in the theater, in playwriting and everything, by imitating the technique of the movies, which we can't cope with. Because if we have this room and then we go to another one, we have to somehow take away all this furniture, bring in other furniture, and it becomes a tremendous problem, because the very nature of the theater doesn't allow that kind of variety. It's a different medium. So I felt that this telling naturalistically the story of families without poetry, without grandeur, without a concept that you feel that it happens today. For instance, like in Albie's play, that you have a feeling what he wrote in this very good play of his.
Who's Afraid of
Who's
Virginia
Afraid?
Woolf?
Those are contemporary people. That's not relatives. I know such people. These are people of. This couldn't have been. That's not Chekhov. This is people today that I know, and this was so remarkable. That I don't call relative. But if you are keeping, repeating memories of relative about your two brothers and things, it's very boring. And also, our life is not life with father, and not I remember mama. We don't live that kind of life. Those people who were designing those sets, they had a style because it's the same set. It was taking place in a living room, a drawing room. Well, we are, for instance, when I worked on company, I made notes. How many buttons did I push from 8 o'clock in the morning till 12? It was staggering how many places I find myself. Now that's the way we live.
Pushing buttons.
You're pushing buttons, finding ourselves in different places. Our drama doesn't take place only in the living room. It takes place in the subway, it takes place in a car, it takes place. So there is a conflict in one way, not to imitate the technique of the movies, because we can't and we shouldn't. At the same time, we find ourselves all over the place. So that is a real, a genuine problem. You see, when you live in a modern city, you see, and that's why the set, for instance, for company, has a hospital quality. There's my whole inspiration was based on the lobby here. You see, the whiteness here, with the policeman sitting over there, that gave me
Of Lincoln Center, you mean?
Lincoln Center. You see, they gave me a feeling much more of a hospital. You see, and I feel that because the thing is to get the essence of a place. I find after designing company that the city imitates me. Wherever I go, I see those projections with those things. I mean, because I didn't find a place like this exactly, but that's the way the city affects me. I wasn't interested in Coca-Cola signs.
Yeah, yeah.
I was interested, what does the city do to you? Because I felt that when you are in Versailles, you bow. When you're in New York, you save your life from one car to another. So that's the way it should be directed. You keep on moving from place to place in order not to be run over.
Now, Boris, suppose I came to you and I said, Mr. Aronson, it's very nice of you to see me. My name is John Smith. I am now in my first year at the Yale School of Drama, but what I really want to do in life is to design for the theater. Could you please advise me about what I ought to do to prepare myself for this work? And in addition, how does one get into the theater? How can I get my first job? Can I make a living doing it? What would be your advice to me?
First of all, I don't believe there is such thing as a stage designer. You can only take lessons in designing for the stage if you are either a painter or an architect, or if you are as gifted as Leonardo, you can also be an engineer and a poet and many other things, you see, but it's very unusual. But basically, you have a certain basic fundamental thing which makes you an artist, you see. And then you apply it, you see. But you can't, if you never paint, let's say, and if you never had any experience in any other craft in connection with the theater, you can't start to learn only stage design. You know what I mean? Because it's like if you can draw a nose, you can draw a door. But you have to have some basic thing before you specifically concentrated on stage design. There are a few schools like this, you know, where they teach you stage design. And then it depends if, first of all, if you basically have that kind of a gift for this medium. Because the thing which is fascinating in this medium is the make-believe, the hamminess and the bluff and the illusion, in a higher sense of the word, is fascinating.
But given the fact that I, at 20, ambitious, have some talent to draw, I have some draftsmanship, I have some training and some instinct for color, I have some instinct and training for architecture and interior decoration. To convert this into stage design, isn't it necessary for me to be around a theater? Should I be an actor? Should I try to be a director, a stage manager? Should I paint scenery? Should I go and work in a shop somewhere? How much do I need to know about lighting? In the old days, by the old days I mean when you and I first worked together, Boris, designers, generally speaking, lighted their own shows. And by and large, I think they usually did the costumes. I think you did. You did scenery and costumes and lighting. Now we live in a specialized world, as you call it, the button-pushing world, and everything becomes departmentalized, which, may I say, from the point of view of the director, is enormously complex, because instead of dealing with one intelligence, he deals with three. And when I have you designing the settings, Florence Klotz designing the costumes, and that marvelous Jennifer Tipton doing the lighting, my problem is to be sure that the three of you work on the same wavelength. I leave that entirely to you, of course, as you know, but still, it is three intelligences being merged into one. So as a young designer, hopefully going to work in the theater, I want to know what I need to do to prepare myself for this work.
First of all, there's no doubt that the greatest experience is actually to work on a stage, for instance, like in this theater in the Bronx, under impossible conditions, you know, as far as money and craftsmanship and so on, because it wasn't unionized, and that's what made it possible to experiment so much. That, in the same time, is theater. That, in the same time, there was an opportunity to try something and to experience, because there are two phases in the growth of a person professionally. One is his basic talent, a God-given thing, which it's like charm. You either have it or you don't. I mean, you're not going to... You see, some people, when they hire you, they can't understand why you come through on every level, because they signed a contract with you. So they don't understand why you are not excellent in drawing and in painting and lighting and in mechanics and so on. And there's no such a bird, you see, because talent means limitations to me. That means one thing you are absolutely tops, and other things you are rather very weak, because that shows you're a real thing. Because otherwise it's too mechanical if you can answer everything and do everything. So I happened to be lucky enough when I was interviewed, and they asked me once, what is your greatest achievement in the theater? I said, the shows I refuse to do. I consider that a very great achievement, especially when you are not well-to-do, when you really have to make a living, you know, to exist, and still you are offered the show like a majority to one. And when the whole Jewish problem is solved, that she can make gefilte fish for the Japanese farm, I wouldn't do a show like this, because it's below. I'll do 3 Men on a Horse again, because I think it's very clever and interesting and American, and I'll gladly do it.
Do you think the American theater, and when I say American theater, you realize, Boris, I don't mean Broadway, I mean the American theater, involving American actors, playwrights, designers, directors, composers, and so on. Do you think now, as we sit here on the 20th of March, 1975, do you think it has a hopeful, happy future?
You see, my I have changed since I lived here, naturally. It would be, you know, but I came here in 1923, so I was already half European. And I was I left Russia 5 years after the revolution. And I was very close to Habima and the Jewish Comedy Theater, and my teacher was Alexandra Exter, who did the most advanced work for Tairov. So I was connected with all those movements. And actually, I came to America because I wrote 2 books in Russian in Berlin, and they were so successful that I got $400 in 1922. I decided Europe is too small for
What were the books precisely?
One book was about Chagall.
You wrote a book about Chagall?
Yeah, in Russian, translated in German. And the other book is Modern Jewish Graphic Art, which is a very remarkable thing. It's a book which proves that there's no such thing like Jewish art, because I believe in a style where a Japanese, I make a point, when a Japanese draws a cloud, it looks Japanese, but clouds are all over the world. But he makes it Japanese because it's been there for a couple thousand years, and he has a way of looking at it. And I said that the Israeli art, the Jewish art, is not genuine because it's not observed enough in one place to have its character. Very much influenced by French and modern art and so on and so forth. Well, those 2 books, for some mysterious reason, because I'm not pretending to be an author, and they were so successful, they were published by the best publisher in Berlin, that I came here under the influence of Tatlin and Lisitsky and Ehrenburg. It was a whole movement in Berlin where we all lived together. My ambition was to make Wrigley signs of neon lights and bulbs. But after a month here, my money was gone, and I find myself in the Bronx, 180th Street, doing shows about hell and heaven.
And you were in your early 20s there?
Yes. So my whole Americanization was a very slow thing, from the Yiddish theater to Morris Schwartz to Eva Le Guardian. And my movement from 180th Street to Metropolitan Opera House took only 50 years.
That's a long trip, of course.
Yeah, it was a long trip, but it was from step to step to step, where there was a combination. So one way you learn your craft, and the other way you developed what you stand for. And I cannot control. I control as much as possible the type of shows I take. But I am very much, and I'm very unhappy that our time, which I think is a Renaissance time, I think this is the greatest time in the history of people. And I see no reflection of it in the arts, you know. Because when they put, I have a heart condition, and they put this pacemaker, and I was half delirious in the process. And I thought, suppose we wake up Leonardo and we show him pop art. And then we show him the pacemaker. What would he think represents the 20th century? I think the pacemaker.
Yeah. You were pretty impressed when they did an electrocardiogram over the telephone, weren't
Right.
you? Tell about
Right.
that. Tell about that.
Because I find that the science, many aspects of the science to me are so inventive, are so remarkable, are so, the tragedy is that it's taken care only of one thing and creates many new problems which are not taken care of, because you see the very fact that the bomb can kill so many people, you see, that's the negative part of it. But the inventions are so remarkable, and I don't see the connection, I don't see the reflection of our time, the way we exist, what's happening today, politically, in everywhere in the world. To me, is so fantastic that if you would imagine for instance, years before it happened, you would imagine that 3 hippies will go to China, play table ping pong, and they'll change the relationship between Russia, America, and China. Shakespeare couldn't invent it.
Now tell about the pacemaker on the telephone.
There was a terrible crisis on the show we worked on, Dreyfus, that I got sick in the worst possible moment, which was valuable to me, when the whole thing was the first time on the stage. Because usually, no matter who does the lighting or who does the costumes or who does, I'm in it with them. And also I see it for the first time in reality and with the people with the whole thing. So I went to my doctor and I said, is there anything which he can do for me that I have at least 2 days before I go back to the hospital? So he says, the only thing he can do for me is to give me that little gimmick, which I have to connect with the hospital, and they will listen to my heartbeat. And if it's more or less normal, he will allow me to continue with the show.
So the diagnosis was made by telephone?
Yeah.
Because you had a little device?
A little device that size. And I was so taken by it, because I don't separate. You see, if it's not in watercolor or not in oil, then it's not a work of art. That's not my point of view about art and life and so on. I think, you see, that in designing, if you find, for instance, a shape somewhere which is not yet an exhibition, because you have to remember, if you take this thing and you put it on a pedestal at Castelli's, that's a work of art worth $2,000. This way, it's an ashtray.
Yeah, yeah.
So I say, unless as an artist, as a designer, or as a painter, that you learn to see beauty in things which are not signed by Picasso. That, to me, is a very important thing in education.
Now, Boris, you, in the course of your work, went to England and worked at the Old Vic, at the British National Theatre.
Yeah.
What was the production you did there?
I did Coriolanus with Laurence Olivier.
You did the Shakespeare's play Coriolanus,
Yeah.
and was Larry the director, or?
No, Peter Hall.
Peter Hall directed, and
Yeah.
Laurence Olivier played the lead.
Yeah.
Now, working there in the British National Theatre with Peter Hall and Olivier and at the Old Vic, and having worked so much in the commercial Broadway theatre, what did you observe were the principal differences so far as you, as a contributor, were concerned?
I was so flabbergasted and so bewildered that there is such a thing as working without the pressures, without all the difficulties, without the deadline, and just really trying to, first of all, the first thing they did is they had so much space for rehearsal that they were able from the very beginning to make a skeleton of the set, to rehearse on it from the first time. And Larry would come there, which impressed me so much, all by himself, trying out, walking on the thing. He made a jump over there, which only a real acrobat could ever have done.
Douglas Fairbanks,
Oh,
the original.
unbelievable, you see. And it was such a natural to him. I mean, and the whole method of working was so pleasant, you see. And also, as far as the compensation, when I found out they gave me a cottage, I was there with Lisa, my wife, and Mark, my son, and I had the minimum of expenses. Then I found out that Laurence Olivier got just a little bit more delighted. So I felt that it's ridiculous, I mean, not to be happy with this kind of a setup. And so the whole, they have the shop over there where the costumes are made there, the props are made there. This goes on from generation to generation. They don't get the kind of money stagehand get here, but it's a solid occupation for them, for the children, and it has tremendous advantages from that point of view, that you can do the type of work which is almost impossible to achieve.
You know, our good mutual friend Bob Anderson once said how he wished that the theater could be a place where one could make a living and not only a killing. That, of course, is essential in the permanence of the theater. When you have the National, when you have the Comédie Française, I remember in Paris going back to see some of the actors of the Comédie, and you go to their dressing room and it's like a little apartment. They sort of live there sometimes. They have little kitchens, they have a little place to sleep, and very frequently they live in their dressing rooms.
Yeah, but in America, you see, the thing which I learned here, you see, I have a very strong feeling that America lives really and functions on catastrophes. As catastrophes here is a way of life. It's not just an accident. It's not just what happens every once in a while. As a matter of fact, the economy is partly based on catastrophes. Each time the most horrible thing happens, that means it creates tremendous amount of work. A building which could remain for another 200 years is being demolished. In other words, what fascinates me, and I may be negative to someone, the difference to me between America and Europe is the dynamism of this country. And it is very tough to take, you see, especially if you are half connected with what I call patina, you see. To me, for instance, Pinter is patina, you see. It has, the main quality is belonging to something. I mean, those people there, I have a feeling it comes from a certain part of England and so on. I think we are constantly breaking it up. The main thing is not to have that kind of a thing. The main thing is, so every once in a while you'll see a remarkable production, a very interesting thing, but in no way does it lead to anything. In no way is it a part of something that you can build up. You see, because the whole nature of the dynamism of this country is just fascinates me, because I'm not a retiring man. You see, I'm not interested in only traditional things, although I enjoy them, but I enjoy them as a museum piece. And this power in this country, to me, is very real. But you have to write like this.
Now let's talk about, we're talking about change. We've gone into, in the last decade or so, we've moved into new shapes and styles of theater. There came the arena stage for a time, which then was somehow compromised into the thrust stage. From the design point of view, Boris, how do you view these developments? Do you feel, for example, that it's possible to take a traditional play and play it on a thrust stage, or do you think plays need to be written for the architecture in the way that we certainly know that Shakespeare wrote for the Globe? And one of the difficulties of Shakespeare production has been the fact that we've had to somehow adapt the Globe structure to a normal proscenium where people sit and look up at the stage.
The thing which I can't go along with, for instance, like in a Bowman theater, is to solve it in terms that you have a proscenium stage and you also have an open stage. It's like saying, make me a man and a woman at the same time. It would be better. I don't want only a man.
That's been done.
It has been done, but very unsuccessfully, because the best thing I ever saw at the Bowman Theater was the Oppenheim trial, because the way this place is designed, it's ideal for trials. Mm-hmm. And when they put up a trial there, it looked excellent. But it does not apply to certain classical plays and other things which they did. It's only in a way, because you cannot combine two completely different things.
Now, were you troubled by Mike Nichols' production of Uncle Vanya at the Circle
They
in the
offered
Square?
me the show, and they wanted me very badly to do that. And I saw the setup of that house. It's a corridor to me.
Yes.
The essence of this play of Chekhov, to me, is intimacy. because you can't wind up by just playing the instrument and drinking tea all the time. That's not the essence of Chekhov, you see. And by cluttering up the people in a corridor like this, I had no way of solving. I loved the play, and I would have been delighted to work on it, but I couldn't for the life of me combine it with this space.
But now, when you finally did see it and saw what your friend Tony Walton accomplished, were you pleased? Did you think that was?
I thought under the circumstances, I mean, that he just couldn't help it. You see, that he has to wind up to have that table there with the summer wire, with the thing, and the people have to come. But I thought that the essence of the whole thing is utmost intimacy. You see, that this is the most characteristic thing, because the genius of the whole writing is to make so much of actually Chekhov. Again, when I approach it, I would say, knowing his writing in his letters and everything he wrote, that he deals with boredom. Could you imagine what a genius you have to be to write about boredom with that insight?
Do you remember the first Chekhov production you ever saw, Boris?
Cherry Orchard.
Cherry Orchard. Where?
Moscow.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you remember the first play you ever saw in your life?
The first thing which made me be drunk with theater, because my father was a rabbi, and I don't come from an atmosphere of artists, designers, and so on. My father was a very educated man who knew Russian very well, who knew Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. We were discussing things and so on. But he had nothing to do with the visual arts. But I saw, when I was 8 years old, by accident, we have an opera house in Kiev, and I saw a curtain there with a huge fasten. I thought, this is where I belong. That's all. And I kept on crying. I'm 8 years old, I never was in an opera house, you know. And from there on, I got so interested in that visual, imaginary thing. To me, it was just fantastic, absolutely.
Well, Boris, I think that one hears finally everything about the human condition, because as you were telling your experience, the age of 8, at the Kiev Opera House, all I could think of was our friend Cole Porter, who told me once that when he was 8 years old, he went to the vaudeville house in Peru, Indiana, where he comes from. They call it Peru, Indiana. And he said he was taken there, and the lights came on, and there was a curtain of the Grand Canal in Venice. And he said that moment dictated the course of his life from that point on. He wanted to be in the theater. He never wanted to be out of the theater. He just wanted to work in the theater. And that whole Venetian thing obsessed him to a point where when he was able, he went to Venice, and he rented a palazzo, and he lived in Venice for about a year. And when he did Kiss Me, Kate, you remember, he had a number called We Open in Venice. And it's always that dream, that illusion, that bubble, that something that leads us on and sustains us, don't you?
Oh yeah, this is a very, very powerful thing. You see, if you are affected, I'm also, of course, I painted the circus a lot.
I know.
And I travel with the circus. And the thing which fascinates me so much about the circus is the whole make-believe, and also the combination. You see, the great art to me is when there is a synthesis between what you're trying to say as an artist and the method you apply. For instance, there was a clown, Newman, is dead now, and he used to take out from his pocket about a couple thousand bananas. But he designed the bananas, because, you know, this was some accomplishment. to constantly taking out. And I thought this is the height. And all he has to say is how to take out a lot of bananas. There's nothing else to say. That's, well, the way he does it and the way it looks is all of a piece. Now, if you reach in life as a creative artist, that combination of both, it so happened, for instance, that I have been painting lately a lot. And I think for the first time in my life, I found a synthesis between what I'm trying to say. By the way, I'm not a profound person. I'm affected by shapes.
Well, we'll be the judge of that.
No, but no, I tell you, I'm affected by shapes of things much more, but by a great statement of something which has a great depth and so on. I don't think it's a part of me. But I'm drunk with a form, with a thing. And for the first time now, since I live in my new house, that I found what the thing, I can work 24 hours now on whatever I do, because I see it goes together.
You know, Boris, I once heard Picasso say, when critics and art experts and dealers get together, they talk about trend and style and form and the abstractions of meaning. He said, when painters get together, they talk about where can you buy the best turpentine, which makes a big difference. So when we talk about profundity, well, that's for someone else. I mean, we're supposed to be craftsmen, professional, be there on time and do our job, and that's about all
but
we
that is two point of views. I can imagine a very sincere approach by people who work in the theater, who look at it as a profession, as a commercial art, as a profession, as a, whether the craft is the most important thing, that they can solve problems. I don't function that way, and I'm not interested in that way, and I don't consider myself, I'm not, this is, that part of it alone, to me, would be the most boring thing. I would never continue if I would look at it only that this is a mechanical thing, which all you have to do. Because first of all, I find, as I said to you in the beginning, that it's a collective art. It's not done by one person, you see. So.
Yeah. Well, I suppose that is the importance of the controlling intelligence, whether it's the director or the playwright. Someone has to be served, and as a director, of course, I think the play should be served. You as a designer try always to serve the play. It's very dangerous to hear this talk about an actor's theater or a director's theater. I'm afraid we're getting into a bastardized form of
No,
ego.
because you can prove it in reality. You can prove it that because I live in two worlds, because I live in a world of painting and sculpture where I'm all by myself. There's no one assisting me when I paint. And the theater is a collective thing because there's so many people participating in it. Of course, there's always a remarkable exception. I heard Stanislavski lecturing in the Habima and telling them of his demands, what an actor should be, and they were just unbelievable what he wants from an actor. He has to be a dancer, he has to be a fighter, he has to know how to wear clothes, he has to know history, he has to have diction, he kept on mentioning all the thing, and then he winds up, all this does not apply to Shalapi. You see, so in other words, there's always someone who breaks all your rules, and I really don't believe in the rule. If I would feel that I already created around me a formula, I would quit. That I can tell you. It would be no more fun to work. You see, once you know how to solve a problem, once you have a method, you see, that means that's the end of you.
Have you ever been completely satisfied with a piece of work?
I was satisfied, for instance, I had a lot of fun. We're working on JB by McClish.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, there are two books which influenced my life tremendously. One is the book of Job, because when I went to Cheder and learned Hebrew, the first time I learned the book of Job, I remember what effect. And then I read Byron, he has a poem about king. which is the complete opposite of the Bible. I had a terrible argument with my father. I said, he is the healer. He says to God, why do people have to get sick and you have to heal them and then you say hallelujah? Why? He's the questionnaire. And I told my father that I cried falsely because I understood something else. The other one is Don Quixote. Those are things which are so monumental. I don't think that McLeish play is completely satisfactory, you see. It's not satisfactory because the idea is tremendous of combining what happens in America today with the fate of Job. The end is very unsatisfactory, and I told this to McLeish. I said, you can't wind up a situation like this, that a wife is coming back to you and she brings you an apple and a candle, it's all straightened out.
Yeah. Boris, we're going to take a little break now, and we'll continue with some personal stuff. Now, Boris, awkward and indiscreet as some of this may be that's coming up, I find that I am interested, and I think that viewers of this tape in the future will be interested, aside from simply a man's work, I think they like to know something about the man himself. So for a few minutes, I'm going to ask you some personal questions. How old were you when you married?
Married 30 years ago.
30 years ago, so you were 45.
I'm much older than Lisa.
You were married at 45. Was that your first marriage?
No.
You'd been married before?
Yeah.
When were you first married? How old were you, approximately?
I must have been about 8, 10 years earlier.
Earlier.
Yeah.
What happened to that marriage?
It simply
Fell apart.
fell apart.
Oh.
She was an actress. She was the main actress of their Bima. She played the boy in the production. She was brilliant in it. And I met her. She worked at that time when I worked in the Yiddish theater. She was connected with some Yiddish theater.
What was her name?
Miriam Elias.
And you were married for about 8 years, 7 or 8 years?
I think less than that.
Less than that.
Yeah, about 6.
Now, your wife, Lisa Yalowitz, is in her own way also a brilliant creative spirit, and I know that she has been a very valued assistant and collaborator in your work for all these years.
Extremely.
Now, as you know, I'm married to an actress, Ruth Gordon, and we try hard never to work together. We have worked together, we've written films together, and I've directed her in several plays, and I've directed plays that she has written. But if we have a choice, we prefer not to work together. Now, I take it that's not the condition in your work and marriage. You sort of like to work with Lisa, and I know she likes to work with you.
Yes and no. She's very feminine, and she's perfectly satisfied to be what she is. The theatricality, which some of it is a little superficial, I don't mind that, because I like hamminess, I like tinsel, I really do. I mean, genuinely, I like it. She doesn't. She doesn't. She comes from a very, her father is a conductor, was a conductor in Köln. She comes from a very different thing, a different background completely. She's much, much more assimilated. I mean, her Jewishness is almost impossible to trace.
I think since she's not here, we better record the fact that she's an enormously attractive and beautiful girl. Now, having said that, how did you meet her?
As a matter of fact, Berghoff, she used to work for Berghoff.
Herbert Berghoff.
Yeah, and she used to design sets and costumes for him when he was in the village. And he introduced her to me, and as a matter of fact, he introduced me, said that she used to work for that Viennese designer who did a lot of Broadway shows. If you'll know his name, he did that very big musical. He's in Hollywood now. Anyhow, she also worked for Joe.
From Rosina?
Yes. So that started it, actually, that she worked for me for a while. And then I just had a chance to watch her, see her, and know her, and we got married.
Now, what does she do precisely when you do a production?
She is very good, exceptionally good also, in analyzing the play, trying to see what is essentially the most important thing to solve it in the way she's very conscious of techniques. And by now, for instance, being connected with me with so many shows, she required a tremendous amount of real solid knowledge, you see, of all kinds of problems which are constantly changing and getting more and more complicated because the theater is so mechanized now. And she makes working drawings sometimes, and
She works on the models, I know.
she works on the models, so she can make a miniature quarter-inch model with every
Work of
detail,
art,
which are absolutely out of
yeah.
this world. And except that she would be the happiest woman to take care of the flowers and the trees and the things. She loves it, she likes it, and this thing takes up so much of, like it takes...
now, you live in the country a lot now,
yeah,
don't you?
yeah.
You built a house in the
Yeah.
country. You designed the house that you...
Lisa had a lot to do. I had a lot to do. No, we had a problem how to combine a place, what I call a lab. The whole idea of the place was, I told the architect, I want a lab for living and working, and I don't want it to be just in perfect shape 50 years from now. I want it temporary. If it stays for 20 years, I'll be perfectly happy. I want it. She almost killed me when she heard me say, she says, he's going to make a garage for you, not a house. I said, I don't care if you see the nails. I don't care. I want to combine a studio where I can work on a large scale and a small scale, and also live, and also a place for Lisa, a place for me, and a tremendous amount of storage space, because I have my paintings for all my life, and I have models, and I have, then the reason the book...
Now, your son Mark no longer lives with you.
No.
He's out in the world on his own. Has
Right.
he inherited any talent from his mother and father?
Well, he went off. This is he went off like young people are today. It is a problem for someone who is a son of someone who has his ups and downs and thing. It is not at all a simple thing. I developed the theory that it's a great thing to be a father. I mean, it's not at all a matter of producing a child. It's a matter of knowledge, which I don't possess.
I was only interested in following that little line of hereditary talents to know if Mark has any interest in the visual or the graphic.
He painted very interestingly. He did, but he got like most young people in mystical things
Oh, yes, the
and
occult
religious
these
things
days.
and all kinds. And it is and the influence of a person who affected him so much that it is impossible to, unless someday it changes.
How old is he today?
He is 24.
Well, 24 is young, isn't it? Think of yourself at 21, 24. I think of myself at 24. You know, you're another human being, and Mark is a lovely young man. He'll certainly find his way. What time do you get up in the morning? Same time every morning, or different?
No, it varies, but not later than 8 or so on, because I can't get over the effect of nature. I lived in big cities all my life, and being close to a tree, as I am now, affects my life so much I can't explain it to you. I can't.
Well, try. Why should a tree
well,
have such an effect on you?
Because I see, you see, there are two. As a matter of fact, this is my approach to what I'm trying to do with this musical now. There are two ornaments which exist in life. One is a leaf, or anything which is in nature. But you'll never find two leaves that look alike. And they are not geometrical. They are freely drawn. So each shape has a different thing because it's a free thing. And then there is the mechanization, tools and things which are done mechanically. They're two different things completely. Watching a wind or a snow or the effect of a bird on a tree is so fascinating to me. It's so endless. It's a ballet. It is absolutely, I can't have enough. In the beginning, I couldn't work at all.
Good heavens, Boris, at the age of 75, you became a bird watcher. That
no, it's not
usually happens earlier.
No, it's just not only, you see, if a tree is removed from you 20, 30 feet, it becomes like a postcard. But if it is 2, 3 feet from your window, and the whole house is windows, you see, I have very, very few walls. It's mostly all transparent. And in nature, no matter when it's wild, or when it is calm, or when it is snow, the beauty of it is just indescribable. I can't get over it. I mean, I am very much affected by it. I never had it.
Boris, my dear fellow, one of the glorious things about a rambling conversation such as this is that you can cover a wide-ranging field. And one of the drawbacks is that we lose a thread and don't get back to it. We were talking about our collaboration on the Diary of Anne Frank, and you very, very carefully and trenchantly pointed out how you were working for an effect of claustrophobia, since that was, after all, the essence of the play, people in hiding. But then let's pursue a little bit more some of our memories of how that production actually got itself onto the stage eventually of the Court Theater. I can remember you and I so passionately arguing with the producer about the importance of having the players enter from below. Remember? We said the only way the audience will have the illusion that these people are actually in an attic is if they come up through the floor. And as it turned out, the theater that they gave us in New York was the Court Theater, which had a steel girder, you remember, running right where we needed that entrance, and we simply couldn't get that entrance from below, and Kermit Bloomgarten was ready to abandon it. But I remember that you and I were beside ourselves. We were absolutely mad, and how that was solved technically, I don't even remember, but I know that that detail became
But
terribly
we
important
also
to us.
introduced, when you talked, because you asked me about conception, about what the working on a show, and not only a point of view of making sketches and drawings and models. For instance, the idea of having Amsterdam in full glory, which is a very beautiful city, against that thing, the contrast The one, all this horror is taking place inside. All this takes place against a gorgeous city. I mean, that again was a concept. That wasn't a decorative effect. That wasn't just a question to put up a drop. This is an illustration when you are working for the material. When you are making, because it's the same thing, like for instance, when I did Cabaret, and I asked, because I'm a camera I designed, so I asked her, why are you making a musical out of this? What is there which makes it a musical? He says, my main reason is to show that what happened at that time in Berlin could happen now in New York, in America. So I said to myself, how do you visually interpret that thought, let's say if you agree with it? So I said to myself, the only way I can imagine it is to have a huge mirror tilted, and when the audience come in, they're reflected. Now they may not know, they may not ever think of it in those terms, but if they do or they don't, I would know that they are all, look at yourself. And I believe, for instance, but I saw more mirrors in shows since I did it, where they don't belong, where it has nothing to do with it. So because to imitate it mechanically, this is what I resent, and this is what I'm there. It meant a lot. When I was in Casino de Paris in Paris, when I worked on Follies, and I saw exactly the same thing copied with nude girls, it was just a matter of copy. I saw a play by Genet for the National Theatre, and then a mirror, the whole stage. And then in the program, the designer said he just wanted the audience to say, look at yourself.
I see. Well, that was
so
clever.
you can have, but my way of thinking, it's just an answer to what you asked me before, was always to interpret the thing, to become a part of it. And then it is impossible to apply the same handwriting to material which have nothing in common. You can't combine, I mean, the quality of Fiddler on the Roof. I mean, it's a primitive thing, basically. It's a Stettel, it's a folk art, it's a Chagall, you see, and as a matter of fact, this to me is the weakness of Chagall as a designer, because he did the opera for the Met, the Mozart. He did exactly like Fiddler on the Roof. All the symbols and all the thing was very, very Jewish. It had nothing to do with Mozart.
But what you said a moment ago, Boris, about your work on I Am a Camera,
Yeah.
which was, of course, a play by John Van Druten based on Isherwood's original work, Berlin Stories. And he turned that into an extremely effective play called I Am a Camera, and you were the designer of that production. Then years later, some 20, I believe,
Yeah.
the same material is brought to you again, and you are asked to design the musical version of the play that you had already done. Now, in some ways, was that not a little bit of a warmed-up love affair? How were you able to become re-inspired in order to do a musical of something you had already done as a straight play?
Because I believe, I so honestly believe in the nature of a medium. What is, there was one setter, and I Am a Camera. That whole thing, the way, was a part of Isherwood's writing, which was a memory, which was a concentrated thing, which shouldn't be distracted with other things and so on. And I did it on the basis how this material, because I think it's very well written.
Oh, beautiful.
And I think that the direction and the whole approach was very excellent.
First class.
You see.
We all remember it.
As a matter of fact, I had a talk with John Van Druten, and I told him that it seems to me that the whole problem of the 6 million Jews who were killed, that was the beginning of the Hitler Holocaust. So I said all he did is when he comes and the Jew is beaten up, he put a little bit of a
A little court plaster, a little band-aid.
Band-aid. So I said, that takes care of all the Jews. But I said, when you have to fix a cocktail with 2 raw eggs, you spend 4 days on that. And I learned the lesson of the beauty of being superficial. Because after you work with Klerman and Strasbeck, you see the joy of doing a thing which is pure champagne. I mean, with such finesse, it has to be a part of you. And I started to enjoy, if a person is that way and he works like that, the other thing wasn't a part of him. You know, they say a Band-Aid took care of the whole problem. But
aren't we talking about style? I mean, style certainly is part of your life and my life.
Oh, absolutely.
And Van Druten certainly had style in
absolutely, absolutely. But it was, you see, the thing which saved me, so to say, on Broadway, that I never took a note of something which is basically only profound. You know, then you become a messiah, Father Divine. I don't belong to that. I mean, I had the same joy. I did a number of shows with Van Druten, you see, and I enjoyed that specific quality. This is what I said before. The very gifted people are very genuine. You know, that they do excellent.
You also said that they were also limited.
They are limited because naturally, if you look at it from a social point of view, the beginning of Nazis, the beginning of anti-Semitism is not really covered as effectively and as real and as all other things are. I mean, I have to be frank about it.
Boris, what do you think is wrong with the theater now?
First of all, life is so rich today. What is going on now? If you think that a man who has 50 wives or 36 wives, where people build up his country with modern technique and so on, that he can stop the whole world into a crisis. If you think of the inconsistencies which are happening today as a reality, they are so dramatic and they are so phony and they are so tragic. And the whole thing with our president, we think this is Shakespeare, where he couldn't even do it, because this is of such a grotesque and of such a reality. It never existed, and the whole world became one thing. I am telling you, at times I just can't believe it. How can you top that drama, which is every day in the newspaper? And how can you top the fact that when you have a crisis like this, all you have to do is to take a plane and go from place to place and have a drink and come back again? There's something about it so grotesque to me, so unreal, so completely disjointed.
But you're not saying that theater is impossible.
No, I'm not. I'm saying theater doesn't reflect one iota, but you can't write. If you ignore all this, you wind up with Simon. If you ignore all this and you only make jokes, then you are ignoring the great drama. Because after all, the drama is the theater. The theater is today, and there's so much is going on. Don't tell me it's nothing happening. What is Renaissance? Then you don't think that at the time of Renaissance they didn't have wars, they didn't have catastrophes, they didn't have things, but that there was. The only difficult thing is to create today. It's like having a child. It still takes 9 months. When I worked on Fidelio, and I went to Vienna, and I saw the Beethoven's surrounding and so on, I said to myself, could he have written Fidelio now? I said, no. Telephone would be ringing, the agent would be bothering, the thing would be. I said, no, because it still needs a certain concentration to do that monumental work, which great work still demands. But you can't knock him out just like that, you see. That's why musicals are different, because a musical is like a poster. A play is like a poem. I mean, a play is a very different thing.
Yes, but we are, of course, faced with the commercial necessity of paying the bill at the end of the week. Now, we know that if it were necessary for the New York Public Library to return a profit every Saturday night or close, that it would indeed close. But that happens in the theater, so it isn't enough to present a piece of work as the artist meant it to be presented. It also must appeal to a sufficient percentage of the mass who will line up and buy tickets, as they're doing today in front of the Brooks Atkinson Theater, where a very entertaining little comedy called Same Time Next Year opened the other night. And if you walk over to 47th Street, you will see about 200 or 300 people standing on a line, using their whole lunch hour in order to buy tickets to see a little one-set play with two characters.
Let me answer you this. Through all my life and through all history of the theater, at the height of Meyerhold and Taira, at the height of the greatest Wachtango, the Habima, and the greatest experiments, because I left 5 years after that. I left at the height of the greatness of the Russian theater. The Desert Song was still the biggest thing. The cheap thing still had their audiences. In France, for instance, it's not only Matisse people were buying in Miro. They were buying the junkiest thing, if you worked in the bourgeois homes, as you ever seen in your life. This, nobody will stop. This will always go on. You know, I did the Desert Song in California with the Arabs running around there, and I was bewildered how people enjoy that. And there are people for it, and I'm not fighting it, and it will always be there. But there should be something else.
All right, a larger question. Now, you have mentioned the Habima. We've talked about the Comédie Française. We know about the Royal Theatre in Stockholm that Ingmar Bergman runs. You have worked at the National Theatre and at the Moscow Art. So we're talking now about permanent institutions. We're talking about national theaters that have subsidies from the government, sometimes even civic theaters. As we know, in Sweden, almost every city of 200,000 population has a civic theater. Going back to the Diary of Anne Frank for a moment, you remember when we did that play in New York, and it succeeded. It played for a couple of years on Broadway, but we're a vast country of 200 million people, and we were playing it in New York. When, however, 2 years later, the rights were released for Germany, you remember that there were 84 productions of that play given within a 6 or 7 month period in 84 different theaters all over Germany. That didn't happen here, and we weren't talking now about the commercial aspects, but about the psychological, the emotional, even the religious aspects of that particular work. So, the big question now is, and I hope we don't come to blows, but what would be your view about a subsidized national theater in the United States? Is that possible in our capitalist structure?
You see, the only way to do it is to compare this. One, Whitehead and Kazan tried to do something for art, for the country, for a national theater, for a repertory. When you compare this with the National Theater, you know very well he's a good friend of you, Larry, and you know he can always get a job, you know he can always do some work and make some millions. He dedicated himself in every way, financially, artistically.
We're talking about Laurence Olivier.
I'm talking Laurence Olivier. Our people, for instance, Kazan is 1,000 times more artistic when he's commercial. I worked with him on JB, which was purely commercial. He fought, for instance, they didn't want me, Deliaga wanted Auslanger. I wanted to change the looks of the theater. There were thousands of things, a very important thing, which only a person with great influence could have fought and get it. And commercially, he was very artistic. Well, when he touched something where you need dedication, he was the worst thing that ever happened in the theater, because that's not his nature. He was working on a movie at the same time. He wasn't that interested in it. He didn't watch other people doing shows over there. He in no way participated. You can't compare him to Larry, how he ran the National Theater, with whom he surrounded himself and how he worked. In other words, if I want to make a lot of money, for instance, the joke of my situation, that after 50 years, I'm offered operas all over the world, including Japan. I'm offered every show first, whatever you see on Broadway. First, they give it to me. So, if I cannot and don't know, and I'll be worse than any other designer if I'll take 4, 5, 6 shows, because I must then make a shop. I want to mechanize it. I have to start experiment. I have to utilize all the shows I did and take a piece from here, from there, and so on. So there is it depends what I prefer. If I prefer this, then I can't take advantage. I can't utilize my success. I don't, because I don't need all this, because Hal Prince would have given me the show no matter what. And the other ones I refuse. They begged me to manage a figure at the Met and so on. I didn't like the conditions because I have a different feeling.
But you're not suggesting that Gaj Kazan wasn't truly, passionately interested in the idea.
I'm not interested how passionately you are. I'm interested how fitting you are to do that kind of sacrifice, because that does not go strictly with a commercial. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. This is a kind of a thing, unless you are willing to sacrifice in the real sense of the word, that you work with other directors, that you get a better staff, that you get a company. And you know how it affects. If the company knows that you yourself don't get 40,000 a year, but you get 10, it has a terrific effect. It had a very big effect on me when I worked on Coriolanus, that I know that my salary is almost similar to the biggest over there. So all this is a sacrifice. I don't deny it. But you can't combine those two things.
Well, the question then is, Kazan aside for the moment, don't you believe that we have theater people among the actors and the directors and the playwrights and designers who would be willing to dedicate their work to the formation of a national theater?
They will only be willing if the whole setup basically is that way.
Of course.
But not because there is, first of all, we are working in reverse. We are starting a movement in the theater from real estate. We never started from a company, from a director, and from actors. Even in the basement. That's the way the Russian art theater, that's the way every movement started. We have real estate. You get millions of dollars. There are 4 theaters here, 3 theaters in Philadelphia. There are no company, there are no actors, there's nothing there except physical real estate. You don't start a movement from real estate. You don't have to. You can hire a place. The best thing at Brecht is in the lousiest theater in East Berlin. I mean, that's not his accomplishment, but that also didn't kill him to accomplish tremendous thing in that house. It's a reversal. Where is your accent? On a house, on real estate? Are calling Shakespeare Theater here in Connecticut? That's nothing. What are they doing there? Who are the actors? Who are the directors? What do they stand for? I don't see it that way.
But still,
if you are talking about accomplishments, if you are talking about where is that national theater, for instance, who is going to the national theater when Pap is going to do it? Isn't that what every producer is trying to do, to get good actors with great reputations?
No, every producer is trying to make a profit, Boris, which is not the essence of a subsidized theater. A subsidized theater means that the pressure of profit is removed from the craftspeople in the theater. And in my view, you could find splendid actors and actresses, even in America, who would be willing to go and play a season for equity minimum, make that sacrifice if they knew that they had a season, that they could have some good, interesting parts to play, and work with good directors. I think that is possible, but it does take a subsidy from above.
It takes another approach, basically, as I'm telling you. My approach, for instance, is not because I'm such a nice guy. I cannot work any other way. You know what I mean? I'm not even trying to make myself a hero. In order for me to function and to do what I believe is only within the limits of certain ways of doing it. If you would call me up and give me only 2 weeks to do Dreyfus, I would say to you it's out of the question. You know what I mean? It's as simple as all that. But most of the shows, once you got Zero Mostel or once you got the house, there were 15 people who will take the job and will do it. By the way, and sometimes it will even run. But that wouldn't change. That wouldn't change my point of view. It needs dedication. It needs complete dedication, you see, in order to do a thing like this. And it has to come from the top, and it has to be naturally. I would say, normally, I would say Kazan would be a very good man for this type of a theater. But did he function that way, you know, when he was on top of it?
Well, naturally, a brilliant and accomplished and able director like Kazan is not necessarily a good administrator. It happens that our friend Larry Olivier is a great actor and also a marvelous administrator because he enjoys business. He really loves business. You don't like business. I don't like business. Larry loves business. He gives anything to go to a board of directors meeting.
Well, let me tell you something. I am not a holy man, as I said through the whole conversation we have. I think the theater, in comparison with other arts, business is a real part of it. I can have an exhibition in a Museum of Modern Art and have only 3 people come to see it, and I can be made. If I have a show and only 10 people come to see it, I'm sunk.
Bust, of course.
Yeah.
Sure.
The theater is based on success. To me, I look at it that way. I look at it that way. I even thinking, for instance, now if this book will come off with the publisher, I like to make it so it shouldn't be $35. I like to make it so it shouldn't be as big as this table that you need an assistant to open and close it. I want to make it popular. I believe the theater should be successful.
Yeah, but now, Boris, you really have hit the nerve. And the nerve is that when I go to the box office of a Broadway theater and buy 2 tickets and am asked for $30 for 2 tickets, I'm stunned. Now, one can say, well, now, come on, you mustn't be old-fashioned. A loaf of bread costs more than it used to cost, and a quart of milk costs more. But somehow it appears to me that the theater economically has removed itself from the stream of our society. Now, we go to Paris from time to time. I went to Paris, well, when I went to see Dreyfus, for example. I got into a taxi, and I told him to take me to the Odeon, where it was playing, and the taxi driver took off, and after a block or 2, he turned to me and he said, I think you'll like this play. He said, it has, in the middle, it's a little boring, but the ending is very moving, the ending. So if it gets a little dull in the middle, don't be discouraged, because I promise you the ending is great. Now, this was just a taxi driver I happened to pick up. Can you imagine getting into a taxi in New York and asking him to take you to some theater and having the taxi driver start to discuss the play with you in the taxi? That wouldn't happen. Why? Well, because taxi drivers don't go to the theater. I'm not sure I know who goes to the theater anymore. I know that when you have a hit, every advertising agency in New York immediately calls either the box office or the producer or an agency and buys 5 pair, 4 pair, 2 pair for every performance for months to come, because they use those as a kind of a commodity for buyers, visitors, and so on. We know that people go to the theater on birthdays and anniversaries and Easter, but that's not a theater-going public, as you know. And I think the theater-going public has been absolutely disoriented from the theater economically. It's simply too expensive. Now, what can we do about that?
Well, we have to approach the thing not only with money, but with imagination. They're really 2 different things. You see, a lot of things are so, for instance, at the Met, I did 2 operas at the Met, Morning Becomes Electra and Fidelia. There is no place to rehearse And you can't rehearse on the stage because they're playing operas every night. That means you have to take off the whole opera. You have no idea how many stages and overtime, what it means, and you have to put up the thing and then put it back again. There was a matter of $4 million or $6 million, which the bankers felt they'd rather not spend it because they never built a place equal to the height of the scenery which is on the stage. So you can't put it on till a few days before the show opens, which is a disastrous thing, you know. And all this figuring of a theater, you see, all this acoustics and all those are real elements which have to be taken care of. And you can have full houses, for instance, at the Met, at $17 a ticket, $20, and lose millions of dollars because it's miscalculated, it's bad business. And also, the opera and the ballet is the only thing in the arts of the theater which are completely unnaturalistic. People die and keep on singing. 4 people sing in different directions and so on. It has nothing to do with naturalism. It's the only medium. A woman who plays Juliet is usually a woman at that size, weighs 300 pounds. What if she sings like a goddess? No one gives a damn. That is a different kind of medium, and it should never depend on such elaboration visually, because the main thing is the arias, the music, and the thing. That is what makes it. That is the most people will go to see it. They see it 50,000 times. They saw Carmen, Aida, but they're going to see another singer, another thing. And it's based, but they don't realize all that. They're giving it, they're giving it such a stupendous productions that they must charge, they charge $50, they'll lose money. So you have to revise. And only people can revise who are really very gifted and very educated and have an approach to the whole thing. I was flabbergasted when I played Mozart, The Marriage of Figaro, how modern it is.
Oh, it's the best, isn't it?
Contemporary it is. When he deals with something which has to do with jealousy, it's the essence of it. That was.
Hey, Boris, what is your definition? What is your definition of a good director?
He must combine all the elements, you see, which is not just a matter of that he can work with actors, or he can fix the script, or he can choose the proper designer and so on. He must really have a general approach, because there's so much is happening to a production, even if it's to start with well written, let's say. I'm not saying from a negative, but it's still, the minute it changes and it goes into the actors and it goes into things that it requires so much inside. It's like, for instance, the knowledge of looking at a model not as a beautiful toy which you enjoy so much because of the smallness of it. It looks like a work of art to start with. Well, how will it look with a 34-foot opening? That almost takes a lifetime to know. That, by the way, is sheer experience. I mean, I didn't know it. I looked at it as is, and I was fooled by it. That is the most, it fools you so much because it's miniature. How can you go wrong? It looks marvelous. A chair, quarter-inch, looks a work of art. So
I've observed that most people don't even know how to look at the model because they stand in front of the model and look down at it. Their eyes would be at the roof of the theater across the street.
You said it, you said it, you said it. All those things are so, to me, a director is a person who is acquainted as much as possible. I mean, you can't cover it all. As I say, it comes back to limitations, which I believe in, but still he has a knowledge. And also instinctively surrounds himself with people with whom he has something in common. You see, by sometimes you say a few words and it just hits you right, or even if you disagree, the fight can be very constructive. But if it is only working in one direction, and that's why a lot of playwrights think that they can do it themselves.
Now, speaking of playwrights, I want to ask you now a few indiscreet questions, but only if you promise to give me indiscreet answers, because otherwise it's no good. So the first one is, what do you think of Arthur Miller? You've worked with him a great deal. You've done many of his plays. How do you think Arthur relates to the movement in the theater of our day?
I have a feeling about our talented few authors that the greatest work they did was biographical. That the best thing they did is something that they are talented and they had an experience with their homes, with their life when they were young and so on. And they, in that work, Glass Menagerie, this
Death of a Salesman.
Death of a Salesman, and I'll mention you, think those are biographical plays, and those are things which have a real quality, much larger than just mishpacha, you know, family and so on. But that's the end, you see. In other words, nothing happened since then, because the play, the last play, besides the one I did, the creation of the world, which he tried to do.
The Price, you mean?
The Price was again about the two brothers, the two thing. It could have been written 30 years ago. It has no reflection of our time, of our thing. So I don't see the development which I demand from a man of talent. I don't see the reflection of living and observing. For instance, he is naturally very much at home with social problems. I mean, it's a part of his makeup, which is perfectly fine, which has a very great place in the theater. Ibsen, a lot of people did it and did it as great works of art. But he stopped without giving it. For instance, the whole youth movement, the whole things which are happening. That seems to me what he was made for, to live among those people, the whole hippies, the whole thing. Not favorable, disfavorable, but that's a part of our time, and a very exciting one. In every way, I see no reflection of that.
Now, how would you rate Tennessee Williams, then?
Tennessee Williams is a poet, and he can't help it no matter what he writes. But when you get stuck, you see, with a certain, of all our playwrights, O'Neill is the only one that didn't get stuck. So he failed, he succeeded, and so on. But if you compared, for instance, two biographies, one by O'Neill and one by Tennessee Williams, by Miller. O'Neill, while it is 100% biography, you recognize him, his wife, his mother, his sons, it's written with a poetic thing. It has, this is also again, by the way, which when I saw it in National Theater, I said to myself, hold it, this is not for you. I mean, this is not what you stand for, this kind of naturalism, this kind of a real thing. And then I said, I'm sorry, I enjoy it, I like it, it's excellent, it has, to me, because you see,
we're talking about Long Day's Journey
Long
Tonight.
Day's Journey Tonight.
And when you say the National, you mean when it did it in England?
In England.
When Laurence Olivier played.
Yeah, when he played it. And he played it as an Irishman, he played it as an American, he played it all. On the other hand, when I saw After the Fall, first of all, there's a basic lie which annoys the life out of me in it. The whole play is Jewish, he's Jewish, his wife is everything in the play. In the play, his part is being played by a Gentile lawyer. When if Thornton Wilder would have written it, I wouldn't question it, because it would never be done in naturalistic terms. It would never been done in that thing. It would have been on a higher level that you wouldn't question that. Is it Jewish? Is it, because he doesn't write like that. But when you go, that he writes very naturalistically. I mean, that's his style. And then he becomes a lawyer, and a Gentile. Now, how is this connected with Marilyn Monroe, and how is this connected with the whole thing? Except I completely reject it.
Now, I gathered from something you said in passing a few minutes ago that you don't have any great admiration for the work of Neil Simon, and I think we can argue that because I admire his work enormously. I think it's no little gift to be a great comic dramatist, and I think we've developed one, and I think he's unappreciated largely, just because he has big hits. That doesn't
that doesn't look. That does not. First of all, I told you that this type of writing and this type of success existed and will exist, I guarantee you, through all the ages, that there is no such a thing, a one style, you see. And there's a production in the New York Times of a woman painter who painted a landscape, and I thought it's a photograph. And a big article saying it's a great work of art, but it's a photograph. So, I mean, and there still has a place, and people admire it. So I'm talking in comparison with what goes on with this type of a thing, that something else too should happen. That's mainly what I was talking. Not to knock and say don't produce those plays and don't make them. There's an audience, there are actors' parts in it, there is people who enjoy it fully. So this is not my aim to say. I'm only placing it where it belongs, and I personally am interested in something else. I mean, I wasn't even interested in the Russian art theater after the revolution. I was much more interested in Meyerhold in Tairov than I was interested in the Three Sisters. I thought, let them go in Moscow. I mean, Uncle Vanya and Togomania, I mean, it didn't interest me. And I know those are great works. So that wasn't the point, that I'm trying to minimize him and say that there has no place in the theater, or that he's not talented, or he's not. Sure, I think it's a tremendous gift.
Boris, to what extent do you think it possible for those of us in our middle years and our advancing years to pass on to the younger people coming up in the theater and in dramatic writing and so on, any of what we have learned and experienced? Now, I know that you, in your studio, have trained a good many splendid designers. I remember some years ago, I think we were working together on the musical on Do Re Mi, and wasn't Ming Cho Lee your assistant then?
Yes.
And I remember him flitting around the studio, doing the most menial things, and he has turned out to be one of our very, very best stage designers.
Absolutely.
Now, which other apprentices of yours have moved on?
I worked with Robert Mitchell. He is very talented, and he's very much interested in a different kind of approach to the theater, you see, by not just following, you see, the ordinary way of designing. He experiments a lot. He did a few ballets. He worked in Philadelphia, and he did a number of things. Now, the problem which someone like this is facing is, again, the collective thing. If you have a play by Brecht, one of the things he did over there, and you don't have the proper director, and you don't have the proper people, and you have a very ingenious set, then sets themselves, I mean, it doesn't work. It becomes very pretentious, and it becomes, because it has to be of a piece. You see, there's another element in the theater which is called luck. Is when you get a play like J.B., which takes place in a circus, half of it is already designed, from my point of view, because it takes place in an environment which is a joy of designing. All those rings, all those areas, all those things. I mean, it's almost impossible to ruin it, from my point of view. You see, there are certain assignments where the very the very thing which is asked from you to do is a gold mine, because it deals with a place which a boat is designed to start with. So you already have in business, you see. And then if you get the right director and the right thing, you know, some miraculous thing happen, because the success of the designer is mainly based on the success of the play, you see. So this is, once he has an opportunity when all those things could be combined, you see, that is a great rarity, especially if you're trying to do something which is Mink, because he concentrated mostly on opera. He did a lot of operas and ballets, and he is very good at it.
By and large, Boris, have you enjoyed your life up to now?
As I say, I live a double life. I have. If it wouldn't be for the painting, my work in the theater would in no way be exciting.
Really?
No.
You mean that wouldn't be satisfying enough or stimulating
not only, I wouldn't, because I have constantly a source where I experiment all the time when I'm not doing the show, and then I can use all this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm using now all this kind of painting I've been doing all the time. And actually, on top of it, I get something Japanese, which is a source of such a works of art that is just fantastic, you see. So that is very, very helpful to me. But I still believe that the greatest achievements are if you are lucky enough that the people who are working on a show are all of the same approach, you see. In other words, when we worked on creation of the world, and there was such a discrepancy between what I was trying to do. After all, this is a very interesting assignment, the creation of the world. You don't get it every other day, to create a garden of Eves and all this. It was very, very interesting. But when Clement was asking for chairs, I said the astronauts didn't took any chairs when they went up there. So, I mean, there has to be a common language when you work on certain things. You can't do it by yourself, because you only wind up then with a very pretentious thing.
In a conversation the other night, someone was heard to say, well, what if there weren't any theaters in New York or in the United States of America? What if you just didn't have any theaters? Would it matter now? Would it matter now that we have film theaters, we have television in every civilized home? What if there weren't any theater? You don't really need theaters. What do you think of that statement?
I think the statements of that nature always existed, and they always will, and they're buried at theater every time. It's true that there are new conditions, completely new, which exist. The very fact, you see, the reason a certain kind of naturalism is absolutely deadly in the theater today, because your eyes are tired, because you've been turning the button on the television. You've been seeing so much color, so many places, in so many environments, you see, that you don't react to it anymore. You can't, you see, it's not exciting to see a pier of Coney Island I did for the group theater years ago. You see, that was a very great novelty to put it on the stage. Today, those things are all over the place. And why spend $10, $15 to see the same thing, which you can see for free by turning a button?
In spite of which, you are optimistic and hopeful, not only about the theater, but about life and about the future.
I am, because I'm not only making, I'm not just a scenery maker, I'm not just a painter, I'm living in modern times, and I'm terribly excited about it. I think it is the most, I saw people who live in London now, who have money and bought houses. I think it's the most tragic thing I
Yes,
ever experienced.
I agree.
I live in the midst of great events, of great happenings, some terrible, some very sad, some extremely exciting, and what that for me is living. I mean,
For the last little while, we've been talking to Boris Aronson, who's a painter, a sculptor, a worker in ceramics, and of course known to us in the theater as the best and most distinguished, accomplished designer of them all. He was born in Kiev, Russia, on the 15th of October, 1900, which makes it very, very convenient. You always knew how old you were. In 1936, you were 36, and in 1942, you were 42. You don't need to be a mathematician to follow that. He's married to Lisa Yalowitz, who also works with him. He designed his first stage production, in America that is, in 1924. And quickly running through some of the more recent productions, going backwards, a Little Night Music, Fiddler on the Roof, Cabaret, Do-Re-Mi, The Rope Dancers, The Diary of Anne Frank, A View from the Bridge, The Crucible, A Season in the Sun, The Rose Tattoo, I Am a Camera, Truckline Cafe. Are you getting tired, Boris? What's Up, The Big People, Skipper Next to God, Love Life. Was that the first musical, Love Life, or had you done musicals before? I remember Love Life you did with Kazan and, and Alan Lerner.
right.
He also designed Heavenly Express, Cabin in the Sky. No, that must have come earlier as a musical, Cabin in the Sky.
Right.
The Odette's play, Clash by Night, the Russian People, Jesus. An earlier musical, Walk a Little Faster.
Oh, yes.
Walk a Little Faster. Awaken, Sing, and Paradise Lost. Both of them Odette's plays. Have I left out anything that you would like to have on the record? J.B. by Archibald MacLeish, a very distinguished success. Sadie Thompson, a musical, I've Got Sixpence, The Frogs of Spring, Bus Stop, that was a big hit for you. The Girls of Summer, A Hole in the Head, another one that we did together. The Cold Wind and the Warm, was that the Behrman show, the Sam Behrman show?
Yeah.
The Cold Wind and the Warm.
Yeah.
Incident at Vichy, downtown. And at the Metropolitan Opera, The Morning Becomes Electra. And at the National Theater, Coriolanus with Olivier, and the musical Zorba, the Arthur Miller play The Price. At the Metropolitan again, Fidelio, then of course Follies. He has won, I suppose, more awards than anyone. How many of those Tonys have you picked up recently, Boris? I can't count them from this.
5.
5. He only has 5 little Tony Awards for his work as a stage designer in the theater. Boris, we're very, very grateful to you for giving us this length of time to tell us what you know. I suppose to tell us everything you know would take several years of conversation and several miles of tape, but we're very grateful to you and very pleased to have what we now have.